Okay. So, as far as I'm concerned, I think I differ from what the learned professor has, the view that he has articulated. And the reason is very simple. If you look at 117, the marginal note also says service of criminal or civil or criminal processes. Now, civil and criminal processes, all right, emanate from the judiciary. Because, I mean, the police do not themselves, serve civil or criminal processes. They must obtain, let's say, a warrant of arrest from a magistrate or the circuit court or the high court, as the case may be. And then it is that process which is then...
The marginal note is immunity from service of process and arrests.
Right. Service of process. But if you look at the provision itself, it says civil or criminal process coming from any court. All right. So the contemplation here is that these processes will emanate from the judiciary and that they cannot be served on the MP within the circumstances prescribed under 117. That is those that you have spelled out, where the person is attending at, returning from, on his way to, and so on and so forth. All right. Now, I think that there should be a conjoint reading of 117 and 118, because Abotsi is right. I mean, Prof. Abotsi is right that the gatekeeping role of the Speaker is supposed to ensure that Parliament, as an independent institution or arm of government, all right, is protected from external interference that will, derail its ability to execute its mandate under the Constitution. And so, the person who represents Parliament, right, or the face of Parliament is the Speaker. He is the one invested with powers under the Constitution to lead Parliament in the execution of its lawmaking mandate, and then its oversight mandate under the Constitution. And so, if you have a situation where there is a threat of, external interference or the reality of external interference that could derail the performance of Parliament's mandate, then the Speaker's role as a gatekeeper of Parliament must kick in. Now, Abotsi again is right about the fact that in the performance of that gatekeeper role, it is only when there is a doubt as to whether the MP was attending at, returning from, or going on his way to Parliament, that the Speaker's role as a gatekeeper kicks in. So, prima facie, you cannot say that, I'm being careful here because the Speaker under the Constitution is the one who can rule on these matters, and he has given a ruling in which he says that you need his permission, all right, in order to be able to arrest, an MP. But I just wonder, as like Prof. Abotsi has said, we took these practices and procedures from the Westminster system, okay, and they have had, hundreds of years, of practice with, the issue of parliamentary privileges and immunities. In fact, one of the first cases in which this came about was in relation to defamation, and that is the case of Stockdale and Hansard. So, when we say the parliamentary Hansard, it comes from that name, because Hansard was the recorder of the House of Commons. And then in the course of proceedings, he recorded, and published proceedings, and Stockdale took the view that the proceedings were defamatory of him, and then issued a writ against Hansard. It was in the context of that Lord Denman CJ took the view that, look, if you think of the exclusive jurisdiction of Parliament, okay, Parliament is the one that can determine the scope of the parliamentary privilege, all right? And so Lord Denman CJ left it to be determined as to whether or not the published material enjoyed the privilege or immunity from suit, all right, to the House of Commons. Now, let's come forward to 2010, all right? 2010, in the case of R.V. Chater, which was decided by the English House of Lords, okay? In that case, the Speaker, the Clerk of Parliament, then wrote to the House of Lords, wrote to the court and stated quite clearly that what constitutes proceedings of Parliament and the scope of the privilege is a matter that must be determined by the court and not Parliament. So we can see that from 1840, when Stockdale and Hansard was decided, all the way to 2010, there has been a shift in the position of the English, system on whether, who has the power to determine the scope of the privilege. Now, the English position is that it is the courts that can determine the scope of the privilege. So it is no longer within the power of Parliament or the Speaker, for that matter, to be able to determine the scope of the privilege that is enjoyed. But you see, Samson, these things, I think the debate has come at a very opportune time in our history as a constitutional democracy. We need to define what we mean by proceedings of Parliament. And I noticed that you are literally cross-examining Abotsi on this on this matter, you know. But I think that it is important that we look at what constitutes proceedings of Parliament. And the example that he gave, if I am in my constituency, attending a funeral in Gambingo, and let's say that I have committed an offense, and I'm told, the police come with a summons at the funeral to arrest me. The question will be whether or not I am attending proceedings of Parliament, because the key phrase is proceedings, of Parliament. And these must be activities that are intimately connected to the functioning of Parliament as a corporate body. All right. The collective activities of Parliament. And for the sake of, I think we are engaged in some kind of legal education here. So I would beg your permission to cite also the case of R.V. Graham Campbell, ex parte Herbert. All right, that's 1935, 1 KB 594. Now, if you take that case, a very interesting case. So there was a committee of the House of Commons known as the Kitchens Committee. All right, that was, in charge of feeding the MPs and feting them when they are, whilst they are the House of Commons and so on. Now, 15 of the members decided to sell alcohol, all right, on the precincts of Parliament. Meanwhile, they did not have a liquor license to do so. Okay, so then the police then filed a complaint at the Bow Street Police Station in London against the 15 members, okay, because they sold alcohol without, a license, all right. Of course, when they were taken to court before the magistrate, they claimed parliamentary privilege, okay. The magistrate disagreed with them and said this was not an activity that was intimately connected to proceedings of Parliament, all right, and so they cannot claim the parliamentary privilege, and they were convicted, okay. In the Chater case that...
And this was even in the precincts
of Parliament, yes.
There's a reason I stress that, because in reading the parliamentary history in the Britain, I discover that there is a lot of emphasis in the immunities application to being within the precincts of Parliament.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, but as I was saying, in the Chater case, which the English Supreme Court decided in 2010. All right. That was also, you remember the expenses scandal. So yes. These 4 MPs, had filed dishonest claims. All right. And their claims, it was discovered through an audit that they had, claimed expenses that were either non-existent or that were not, that ought ordinarily not to have been approved. All right. So they were charged with false accounting. All right. They said, well, these are expenses that were, made or requested pursuant to our functions as members of Parliament. These are allowances that were granted to us under the scheme, approved by the House of Commons. And so we enjoy privilege, we are invoking our parliamentary privilege not to be arrested and prosecuted for the offenses we have committed. All right. So the question before the courts, was whether or not they could claim parliamentary privilege in this circumstance. Interestingly, the Court of First Instance took a view that was very interesting. They said, okay, yes, if these are honest claims, okay, you can claim the privilege. But dishonest claims fall outside the scope of the privilege, and so you can be prosecuted. And that was the issue that went from the High Court to the Court of Appeal, and then subsequently was stated, to the House of Lords for its to the Supreme Court for its decision. And the decision of Lord Phillips is very, very interesting. It affirmed the finding by the lower court that these were dishonest claims, and they were not, claims that were covered under the allowance scheme, and so the privilege could not be claimed in those circumstances. I have taken the time to refer to this history because, as we all agree, we took these practice and procedures from the Westminster system, all right? And so the developments in Britain or in the UK for Parliament, for that matter, should guide us in the way we assert either our rights or privileges or powers in the case of Mr. Speaker. I think that Mr. Speaker's assertion of the right to be able to release, an MP, is because he wants to protect the independence of Parliament. But the question is whether that is a right that is cognizable under Article 117 or 118 of the Constitution. And it is very difficult, from the text of the Constitution itself, okay, to say that this is a power that has been granted to Mr. Speaker. So the power granted to Mr. Speaker that is explicit on the face of 1182 is the certification, all right, that a person was, attending at or returning from or on his way to a proceeding of Parliament. Right. And that is conclusive evidence, all right, of the facts stated. Right. So wherever there's a doubt, then his certification, settles that doubt. All right.
When does the doubt come in that I want to arrest an MP who has committed an offense? Of course, if there's no suspicion of a commission of offense, there will not be a question of arrest. Yeah. Or I want to serve a criminal or civil summons or process on an MP. At what time does the question arise if you want us to read 117, 118 conjunctively? Yes. At what time does it arise that we need the certificate
of the Speaker?
And what is the purpose of the certificate? The purpose of the certificate, is it to give permission, or it is simply to indicate that, yes, indeed, if the MP says he's on his way to Parliament, he's attending at Parliament, or he's returning from Parliament, he is speaking the truth. At what time does it arise?
Okay, so we have a live example, and then we don't have to beat about the bush. Right. So on a very fine Sunday, Honorable Francis Xavier Sosu is in church, all right? And then the police are there to arrest him, okay? Supposing, for the sake of argument, that on that day...
They claim they were not there to arrest him. Well, difficult to believe. But you go on.
Our information, our concrete information, we have concrete information. We even have the names of the officers who were there. It's not, and the pastor of the church is, a witness. Okay. But let's say for the sake of argument that they are there to arrest him, and then they serve, an arrest warrant on him, okay, and then he says, no, I am here in my capacity as an MP to thank the church members for voting for me, or at the invitation of the church in my capacity as an MP. So
there are two stories I've heard from the church. The pastor has said that Sosu is also a pastor. I suppose you know that.
Yes.
Sosu is also a pastor, and that they have an annual program they do, and they invited him as a preacher. Oh, but I've heard the same pastor say again that he's their MP.
Yes.
And they needed him to come over in the capacity of being the MP.
So let's say that he was in a dual capacity.
Yes, supposing that
as a pastor and then as an MP.
Right.
All right. And then the arrest warrant is served on me. He says, look, in my capacity as an MP, I am here attending a proceeding of Parliament. Let's say that is what he said. Okay. All right. The question then becomes whether it is true that being at church to thank your constituents constitutes proceedings of Parliament. And if the police refuse to, to oblige and still went ahead to arrest him, okay, that is when the speaker's certificate kicks in to settle the matter. Okay, if the speaker then issued a certificate saying that being at church in your capacity as an MP constitutes proceedings of parliament, all right, then it will be conclusive, evidence of the fact that these were proceedings of parliament. But even ordinary people will, find such an elastic interpretation of the Constitution a bit absurd, because proceedings, would mean formal, performance of
structured processes.
Of structured processes of, deliberation, or voting, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we need to be careful not to overstretch the meaning of proceedings of parliament in order to in seeking to immunize MPs from the criminal, justice process, because as the learned professor has said, all right, we are dealing here with the rule of law, and for me, we should not behave as if we are above the law or we are outside the law.